I'm just going to tell you a few words about International House Bucharest, the organizer of today's webinar and all the webinars in this series. We are part of a very, very large network of schools, as you can see on the map on your screens, under the umbrella of International House World Organization. And our speaker this evening, Chris, also works for an IH school in Poland. We at IH Bucharest, we have a few different divisions that cover a lot of different types of courses. So we've got language courses for both adults and children, mostly English, but also a lot of German courses, French and Romanian for expats. And our teacher training division deals with not only these webinars, but also qualification courses like CELTA and Delta and the IHCYLT course, as well as a course for very young learner teachers. Our school also takes part in international projects in the Erasmus Plus program, and we're part of two very interesting projects, VR for All and Remote Theater. Some of you may have attended a session on remote theater about a month ago. I know it was very well received. Now, our teacher training center, as I said, also organizes qualification courses for teachers. So if you're looking for any such courses, you can find our offers on our website, celtaromania.ro, or you can drop us an email at celta@ih.ro. And we've got a few CELTA courses coming up this year. You can still sign up for the next part-time course, which will be online, or for one of our face-to-face courses in the summer. We've also got Delta courses, and we're the only center in Romania that runs all three modules of the Delta course. And this year we are turning 20, so we're organizing a very special event for you. You'll also be able to see Chris at this event. It's a conference on the 8th and 9th of April, and you can already sign up for it also on our website. So for now, I'm going to hand you over to Chris, and then I'll be back at the end just to tell you a couple of words about our upcoming events and our certificates. So have fun.
We're going to be taking a fresh look at the fundamentals of grammar. Depending on how quickly we move through things, we're definitely going to be looking at the difference between simple and continuous forms. And we're also going to be looking at the perfect forms. If we have time, we might also start looking at some aspects connected with past forms and with conditionals, but a lot of it depends on how much we can get through in the time available to us. Before we start, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the philosophy of this section. Essentially, when we think about a phenomenon, we have to take away, for a moment at least, how we interpret that phenomenon. Now, I'll give you an example of that because it seems a little bit woolly. Think about will, and think about how often people connect will with the so-called future simple. Most of the time, probably 99% of the time, when we use will, we have some idea of future meaning, okay? But that's what I'm talking about here. The phenomenon of will and our interpretation of will as being the future are not the same. Will is not the future. In fact, most people these days that I speak to agree that the English language does not have a unique future tense. Instead, we use different aspects of different tense forms or verb forms to give future meaning. So what we have to do is separate the phenomenon, like will, from how we interpret that phenomenon. For example, will for the future. Will is not uniquely about the future. Will is a modal verb, or as I tell my students, a mood verb that shows how we feel about a verb And in the case of will, it shows our certainty. That's what will is. Will talks about the certainty of the verb that comes next. Well, when is certainty expressed? Certainty is usually to talk about the future. But that doesn't mean that will is about the future. So hopefully we can take that on board and we can move forward. So let's start with some sentences that use present simple. I live in Poland. She plays football every Saturday. He loves his wife. The train leaves at 10. I've chosen these sentences on purpose because they tend to appear in different grammar lessons across different course books, or maybe at least in the same course book in different grammar lessons. So they are taught as if they were different aspects of present simple. My job for you right now is to think about these sentences just for a minute or so. And I'm going to then choose a volunteer or two to tell me what they think. My goal here is to try to reach a unique understanding of present simple. One understanding that is true for every single sentence. Okay, so like I mentioned before, course books often split these things into 4 different lessons. Our job is to put them as if they were in one lesson. How can we do that? Okay. So I'm going to call on one of the 5s and I'm going to ask Diana Margaretescu. What do you think?
Hello, everyone. I don't know if I did understand what we were supposed to do. If what you were asking was what is the relation between or the aspect that is present in all these sentences. In my opinion, the fact is that these all sentences are true. I mean, if I live in Poland, this is the reality. And also, like, even though it's a everyday or a habit in the second one is also something true. And maybe the fact that he loves his wife. And also the schedule, the official schedule that is in the last one. So maybe the connection is that all are talking about true facts.
Wow, fantastic, Diana. I think you've just saved us about 15 minutes there. That's brilliant. That's exactly what I was hoping somebody would say, but I didn't actually expect us to get there so quickly. So the way that many course books would look at these sentences is the first one would talk about a statement of fact, I live in Poland. The next one would talk about present simple as a repeated habit or routine. The third one would then introduce some kind of a stative verb. They'd say, oh, we use this in the present simple, but not the present continuous. He loves his wife, not he is loving his wife. That would be another lesson, wouldn't it? The whole lesson would be on stative verbs. And then the train leaves at 10 is the so-called present simple for future meaning, which, as I'm sure you would now agree, is nonsense. Very good. All 4 of these statements are connected simply by the truth of what they say. And if we look a little bit closer, we can start to get an idea of where we're going wrong with this secondary meaning, what we see in the course books. If we look at the 4 sentences, what time do we think we're talking about? What time are we talking about in the 4 sentences? I'm going to ask Rhonda Harrison.
Thank you. I was just about to change my number to a 3. After listening to Diana, I was like, that is not what I was going to say. So if we look at what time, we're talking about something that is, as Diana pointed out, it is true right now. I live now. She presently plays football every Saturday. He currently loves his wife, and the train leaves at 10. I guess that's the schedule, even though it's something that hasn't happened yet, but it leaves at 10. And I don't know what time this would be said, but so if we're talking about time, I would say this is, in the present sense.
Mm-hmm. I think that's perfectly logical.
But wrong.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it's wrong, but my own idea is slightly different. And I think, to use a very fancy expression, what we're looking at here is, in a sense, it's a false dichotomy. Yeah. I had this situation just the other day. I was looking at a text with my students, and in one sentence, the text said, he looked at this, blah, 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 and then he glanced at his watch. So I said to one of my students, what does glanced at mean? And they said, it's very quick. You glance at like this. I was like, okay, so what does looked at mean? And they said, oh, well, looked at is much longer. I said, but is it? And they were like, well, if glanced at is short, looked at must be long. I said, no. Glanced at is short, but looked at is neutral. It doesn't tell us if the action is long or short. So when we look at the 4 sentences here, they all use present simple. Do any of them tell us the time of the action in the verb itself?
No.
No. So if we look at the first one, I live in Poland, we know the time is right now because of the context of what we say. We say, I live in Poland, and it must be now because I'm alive to say it. If I was a dead person, it would be very difficult for me to put the words together like that. I think it happened once in The Princess Bride that they were able to put, if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. But generally speaking, from the context, we know that it's present because the person saying it is alive to say it. In the second one, we only know about the time reference because of something else in the sentence. We see every Saturday. The same with the fourth one, the train leaves at 10. We only know that there is this kind of forward schedule because of the at 10. The sentence itself isn't very good because we don't know if that's every day, if it's Saturdays, if it's 10 in the morning, 10 at night. We don't have enough context to really know when the train leaves, but we know that the information is not contained in leaves, it's contained somewhere else. Right. So I think you did a really good job there, Rhonda. I'm glad that you put yourself down as a 5. You were a credit to us. So we can then summarize our understanding of the simple form, the present simple. Present simple tells us about an action that we believe is true, but it does not tell us when that action is. We can only determine the time of the action from the context. We need to look at either the rest of the sentence, or we need to think of the situation in which the person says that sentence. Very good. I like my metaphors. And there is a nice little metaphor that we can think of for present simple. Think about the idea of a soul. Many people believe that the soul is real. But when asked for more detail, very few people can tell us where the soul is. Where is your soul? Oh, it's in my mind. Without my mind, I would have no soul. But I disagree. I feel love in my heart. That's why I draw a picture of a heart, because I believe the soul is in the heart. They agree on one thing, they agree on the existence of the soul, but they don't really know where it is. And in fact, it doesn't matter. Present simple is the same. We can agree on the truth of a statement, but we can't agree on when it refers to without further information, either from the context or from other language in the sentence. Fantastic. So let's move on. Here are two sentences that use present continuous. And again, in a course book, they would probably be divided into two lessons. The same question again. What is the unique aspect that is introduced by continuous? Think about it, and then I'm going to call on somebody to share their ideas. Okay, let me ask Adriana Claudia Boiti.
Yes. So both sentences have got the verbs in the present continuous, but in the second sentence, we have got more details. We have got the word tonight, which makes us think about the fact that it refers to a fixed future arrangement. This is the difference in comparison to the first example.
Very good. Okay, so like we saw with the present simple sentences, we only really know when something is happening because of context or additional information in the sentence. Yeah. So when we go into a course book and they say, today we're going to look at present continuous for future plans, for example, again, that's kind of a nonsense because present continuous maybe doesn't tell us what we think it does in the first place. Does present continuous tell us the time of an action? So Adriana, what do you think?
Well, we only know about present continuous that it refers to a temporary activity taking place now at the moment of speaking.
But the second sentence isn't taking place at the moment of speaking.
Well, not because of the fact that we have got the word tonight, which refers to the future.
It does, doesn't it? Yes. So we've got two sentences. I am having dinner and I am having dinner with my friend tonight. The first sentence talks about a situation that's happening now, but the second sentence talks about a situation in the future. So what we can take from this then is, like with present simple, present continuous does not tell us when the action is taking place. Do we agree with that? I think that's fairly reasonable to say. So if it doesn't tell us when, what does it tell us? I think you're quite close with the idea of it being temporary, but I want a slightly different way of putting it. Wow, Diana's also put her hand up. So Diana, let's go back to you then. Oh, everyone's doing it. Wow, this is brilliant. I'm sorry, I've missed this. So many of my online lessons have been students with just their black screens and no interaction. To actually have people desperate to say something is just a breath of fresh air. So Diana, please tell us what you think.
I've always wanted to use it. So the relation, so the thing that is connected, that connects the two sentences, in my opinion, is the fact that it's an action in progress, or it takes a while to do it. Maybe it's in progress right now, like in the first sentence, or it's something that it takes a while to do it in the future, but also maybe because of it's a personal plan that I'm going to do. So I'm not sure if this is what you've been expecting.
It's very close to it. I would say the idea of it being temporary in the middle of doing something. These ideas are all very close. But I think we can go one step further and make it really clear in a way that will always work for continuous forms. Remember that I spoke to you about the present simple as being like the soul. How do we complete the expression then? And soul.
Heart.
Heart and soul, yeah, a little bit.
Body and soul.
Body and soul. Very good. Now, what do we know about the body that we don't necessarily know about the soul?
It's moving.
It doesn't have to be. If you look at me, most lessons, that's definitely not moving.
Body is something that we can see, but the soul, not really.
Very good. Yeah. There's a
It's
bit more.
reacting. The body is reacting.
The body's reacting. Yeah, there's a little bit more. A little bit more.
They have emotion. They have many manifestation.
This is all very good, but there's something really simple that we can say about a body, and we can measure it, in fact, about a body.
We can measure the temperature. We can measure the smile, the eyes.
We can measure height. That's the key one, isn't it?
Yes.
We can measure a person's height. We know the height of the body, and we can always measure it the same way. Yeah.
Yes.
To measure the height of somebody, you start at their feet and you keep going until you reach the top of their head.
Yes.
Yeah. The body has a beginning and an end. Continuous forms have a beginning and an end. Okay. Simple forms exist outside of time. We can't really put them on a timeline because they're outside of time. We just know that they're true, and we need context to tell us where on the timeline they should go. But it's the context that puts them on the timeline, not the grammar. With continuous forms, we don't necessarily know when they are. I'm having dinner. If we go back to those examples before, I'm having dinner. Maybe we say that because our friend called us on the phone. Can you talk now? No, I can't talk. I'm having dinner. Dinner started. It's going to finish. And in the middle of that action, my friend called. So because of the context, we know that it's in the present moment. But the important thing is, continuous told us there's a start and there's a finish. I'm having dinner with my friend tonight. We learn about the future meaning because of my friend tonight, as many of you have pointed out. But that dinner will still have a beginning and an end. It's limited in duration. So we could call it temporary, but the important thing is just that it has a beginning and an end. Where that beginning and end is depends on us, and it depends on the context that we want to apply.
So it's about the length.
Yeah, but the length we don't know about. It could be a very short action. It could be very long. We have no idea. It doesn't matter. We need the context to tell us the length. All that continuous does is put us on the timeline somewhere with a beginning and an end. It shows that it's a limited action compared to simply being true. So yeah, to summarize here, the present simple form sits inside of time, outside of time. We don't know where. We need the context to tell us. Continuous is inside time, but we don't know where in time it is, apart from the context. So here are 3 sentences. I think there is a God. I'm thinking there is a God. And I'm thinking about what to have for dinner. I'd like you to think grammatically. Out of these 3 sentences, which one is wrong? For this, you can use the chat. Which one do you think is grammatically wrong? Okay, a lot of people are putting number 2 is grammatically wrong. Okay, just another few seconds. I think we get the idea. Most people have gone for 2. Ooh! We've got a couple of different answers. So Maya, hi to you too. Excellent. Okay, some people have come up with some very interesting answers that I want to ask about. So since one person has got a number in front of them, I'm going to ask you. So is it Anton, your first name?
No, that's my last name actually. But
What's your last name?
I'm okay with it.
Okay. How do you pronounce the first name? Is it because you've got the little?
Yeah, it's Razvan.
Razvan. Razvan. Brilliant name. I love it.
Thank you. All right. So I said
tell us about your answer.
Okay, I said none of them are wrong because there's only a difference in meaning. Because when I say I think there is a God, then I have in the second one, I'm taking into consideration the fact that there might be a God. So it's not a wrong sentence, but it needs a larger context. So I don't know, I've had a miracle in my life I couldn't see, and then my vision came back. So now I'm thinking there is a God. There might be a God who did this for me. And then in the third situation, I'm thinking about what to have for dinner. Is like I have a multitude of choices and I have to make a decision. So then I'm actually processing my choices right now.
Yeah, I like the explanation. I think that it hits a lot of, it ticks a lot of the boxes that I wanted to tick for this. That's really good. Adelina has her hand up. Would you like to add something to that analysis?
Hello. Well, I think the second one, as thinking is a stative verb, it can be like used with the ing form there.
Okay, that's interesting, but I'm glad that you raised it. Razvan has the right answer. Several of you have the right answer in the chat. None of these sentences is grammatically incorrect. They are all perfectly correct grammatically. Okay, now that will probably surprise a lot of you because a lot of you did say that sentence 2 was grammatically incorrect in answer to my question. But let's go back over those first principles. We use the simple form to make a statement that we consider to be true. So the person who said, I think there is a God, is simply making what they believe is a true statement. There is no time aspect to it. We couldn't place that belief on a timeline anywhere. It's simply considered true. It's the sole aspect. The second and third sentences use present continuous. And if you remember what we said, continuous only tells us that the action or the verb has a beginning and an end. Now in sentence 3, that's obvious because you start thinking about what to have for dinner and you stop thinking when the decision has been made. So seeing that start and end is very simple. Number 2 is tricky, but we can create a context in which it would be true. The reason it's tricky is that in this kind of context, we don't imagine that think has a start and an end. We might think that it starts, but never finishes because you just start believing it and that's it for the rest of your life. But in that case, we'd probably say the first sentence, I think there is a God. But yeah, you could imagine like the example that was given, that there was a miracle. Maybe I was walking down the street and a car was about to hit me, but then a tree fell down in the road, stopping the car from hitting me. And for a minute there, I was like, oh, do you know what? Yeah, I think there might be one. Yeah, I'm thinking right now there is a God. But then I go walking on and I see something else beautiful, like a bird in the tree, and go, wow, that's amazing. And I've forgotten about that miracle already. So the thinking is finished. It's strange for us to put this verb in the continuous, but it's not because of grammar. So I don't like those sections of course books that tell us that stative verbs are a grammar issue, because they're really not. Stative verbs, if there is even such a thing, are connected to their meaning, not to the grammar itself. And we can see that in a very simple example here. I'm loving it. When McDonald's first introduced this catchphrase, a lot of linguists and a lot of English teachers were up in arms. They're like, oh no, now my students are going to get the present continuous wrong all the time. This is a stative verb. You can't use stative verbs in the continuous. It's against the rules. Except it isn't, because the rules only govern the truth value. A continuous form has a beginning and an end. So there's nothing grammatically wrong with I'm loving it. I actually think that McDonald's are onto something here, because there are times where I suddenly get this desire for a McDonald's burger. And I go to McDonald's and I see the beautiful picture of the burger. Whoa, look at that cheeseburger glistening on the screen. I'll have that, thank you very much. And then it arrives and it looks like somebody sat on it. And I open it and I start eating it. And for the first few mouthfuls, I'm like, oh, that hits the spot. Oh, I am loving this. But then I finish it and I leave McDonald's and I have that heavy feeling in my stomach. And whether it was intentional or not, my love has come to an end. So I'm loving it. It's perfect. It starts and it ends. It's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to love things, and it's generally true. It's the truth statement. McDonald's have hit on it. They're like, do you know what? I wish we could love our food, but that's just not the way it works. You start, and then pretty soon you lose that love. So you're loving it. It's got a limit, the body, not the soul. So yeah, there is no such thing grammatically as a stative verb. It's all about the context, and it's about the meaning of the verb itself. A lot of these verbs have meanings that make more sense when we think of them as the soul, with think and with love, depending on the context. But in other contexts, we can think of the body. I'm thinking about what to have for dinner. You start thinking, you finish the thinking. That's a body in time. We don't always know when in time it is, but we know it has a start and a finish. Right. Let's talk a little bit about what I think of as the problem with perfect. So here we're talking about present perfect. And I've read a lot of academic articles that examine the present perfect. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that I'm not sure we teach it the right way, and I'm not sure we understand it the right way. So present perfect, we're talking about things like, I have lived in England for many years, or I have just done my homework. Who would like to have a go at describing the present perfect and what it's for? Let me see. I've got some fives. I'm going to pull one out of the hat. I know you've done such a great job today, but I've got some other fives, so forgive me if I don't rely on you almost exclusively. Let me ask Tatiana Bilinevich.
Sure. So I think that we use the present perfect when we tell about our life experiences. We've done something, we've been somewhere, and we do not tell when it happened. Because if we mention the date, we should use the present, the past simple. But if we don't, then we can use the present perfect. So it has some connection with the present, but it has been done. So it also somehow connected to the past because the action is finished. It's over.
Possibly, yes. I like it. I think that's a very
I
good
just
description.
I perceive it like this, and based on the grammar course books I've had to deal with. But yes.
No, I like your explanation. I think it's very good. We've got a couple of people with their hands up, so let's go to them. Nesreen.
Yes, I teach the present perfect as unfinished time. After teaching my students the form, I say that it's unfinished time comparing to the past.
What does it mean, unfinished time?
For example, I have broken my leg. My leg is still hurting. But if I said I hurt my leg, this is not supposed to be that I hurt actually my head, my leg. It can be in the past, 2 months ago. But when I say I have broken my leg, it's still hurting.
Yeah, but I can imagine somebody sitting on the floor of on the ground of the playground. You go up to them and say, "What's wrong?" And they go, "I hurt my leg." And we say,
Okay.
"Oh, what? Last month?" So yeah, I kind of agree with what you've said, but I can see context where it wouldn't work.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
otherwise, no, I think you've got a good handle on it anyway. That's nice. Thank you, Nesreen. Nashwa, what would you like to tell us? I'm not sure if Nashwa can hear us. Noor, you've put your hand up as well. What would you like to say?
Okay, hello everyone. I would like to say that whenever I teach the present perfect to my student, I always explain that it's an action that happened in the past and still continues up to our present days, or we can see its result up till now.
That's kind of the textbook definition, isn't it? And I see in the chat that a lot of people have said the same thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I always give them the example which is related to live. For instance, we can say that I have lived in France for 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, I think that the example is good, but the explanation, I think, is just a tiny little bit misleading. And it's misleading for the same reason that most of the explanations in the chat are misleading. So we've got a recent past action with visible results in the present. Possibly. So Adriana, since you wrote that in the chat, let me ask you, a recent past action with visible present results in the present. What do you define as recent?
Recent
Recent
in comparison to the present. For example, I have just come back from let's say Italy. It means that I visited Italy recently, and I returned from that trip.
Okay, so if I wanted to talk about geological time, and it was over the course of 1 million years, can I use present perfect?
No.
No? So if I point at like the Grand Canyon and I say this geological feature has developed over the last 1 million years, that would be grammatically wrong or not?
Well, here I would prefer to use present perfect continuous, has been developing.
But it's still perfect though, isn't it?
Yes.
And yeah, so my point is more about the recent, the use of the word recent. It's too subjective. You know, what's recent for us is not recent for a geologist. For a geologist, recent would be several 100,000 years. Jonathan, what would you like to say? Jonathan King.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm catching your drift because what you're helping us to see is that perfect means that we are standing in a present looking to a past, but that present can be now, or we use perfect in the future, looking back at a past. So the temporary concept of the continuous in the present perfect, or any perfect for that reason, would mean that you are at a certain point looking at the past. And if that past is recent or not, it's subjective. That's why we use the present perfect or present perfect continuous. That's my 2
Jonathan,
cents.
I love it. That is super.
Thanks.
It's a very subtle change from the way that we generally teach. But notice, look through the chat, notice how many times the past is mentioned in the description before the present. Yeah, a lot of course books do this. They start by saying a past action with present consequences, a past action that continues into the present. But Jonathan, what you've done is highlight what I think is the central issue. To understand the present perfect, we need to conceptualize the present first. So I think that if we just turn it around, we get it. And we'll look at some of these examples. In all of these, the one thing that unites every example here. So I've broken my leg. She has never been to China. My friend has been working hard all week, and we have been searching for the meaning of life since the dawn of consciousness. All of them are uttered in the present. Think about when you say these things, you say them in the present. And like Jonathan rightly said, when we say these things in the present, we are looking back at the past. You make that one little change and everything falls into place. So the example we were given earlier of thinking about, what was it exactly? Because it was such a nice little way of putting it. You were talking about if we place ourselves in the past, the present perfect is no longer accessible to us. And that was absolutely right. If we conceptualize ourselves as talking about the past in the past, we need to use a past form. Hello. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to add? Nashwa, what would you like to say?
Actually, when I'm teaching the present perfect, I always use the illustration of the timeline. So I focus on that the present perfect lies between the past and the present. So it has to be connected to our present. So I give them an example of 2 sentences, one of them in the past simple, the other in the present continuous. I always use, I painted my house, and then I use the other sentence as I have painted my house. And then I make sure that they get the idea that I painted my house. Here, I mean that I started the action of painting and now I finished this action. So if they end, and I always tell them, if you enter my house, you will not smell anything. And if you touch the wall, it will be actually dry. But when I say I have painted my house, this has 2 meanings. Either I started painting the house and I'm still painting it now, so it continues up to the present, or that I started painting the house and finished painting the house, but there is an effect that is showing now in the present, which is if you enter the rooms in my house, you will touch the walls and you will find them still wet, or when you enter the house, you can smell the paint. So the present perfect actually has an effect that must show now in this example.
In this example, yes. But coming back to the first slide I showed of the philosophy of what we're discussing here, a phenomenon and how we interpret the phenomenon are not the same thing. Now, somebody mentioned something very interesting and very true in the chat, and they said that a lot of Americans don't bother with perfect. We can explain that, the reason for that very simply, because present perfect comes down to a choice. And the example that you gave of painting the house comes down to a choice. When I say to somebody, what did you do today? They can either talk about the actions in the past, or they can talk now thinking about the actions in the past.
Yes, they do.
the difference is not so much about the effect. If you say, what did you do today? And they say, oh, I painted my house, or I have painted my house. The effect might be identical between the two sentences or not. We don't know unless we have more context, like you say, the physical context of touching the walls to see if the paint is still wet or if it's dried. But the important thing is the choice element. You can choose when you're positioning yourself in the present, you can choose to think about the past or not to think about the past. And I think that's why Americans tend not to use present perfect so much. I think that they just put the action in the past and they're done with it. Whereas in Britain, for one reason or another, we tend to think, here we are in the present, I'm going to think about that past. Now, adopting this approach really pays dividends because it explains why past perfect works the way it does. With past perfect, we can't have a past perfect sentence in isolation because you need to have a past action or a past perspective to look back from. Present perfect has that built in because when we speak, we're establishing our central point. Our point of reference is the present for present perfect, and we're looking back. Past simple, you need to go into the past to do. And once you've got that past simple, you can look further back at past perfect. Yeah, so that, I think that explains everything. And I've got a nice picture that kind of demonstrates it. So here we are. We are the guide. This is the present. And we're looking back at the past. That's when we use present perfect. We're like, ah, yeah, I've painted the walls today. They're still wet or not. Who knows? All we're doing is thinking about a different time. And that, I think, is the real key. We can look at all the other things that follow on from that in some cases, but you'll notice they're not universal. A lot of people said present perfect is a past action with a present consequence. That doesn't work for negatives though, because there's an absence of a consequence. I haven't finished my homework, so the homework is not complete. It's not a complete action. It's not got a consequence then. Maybe there is a negative consequence, but it doesn't come naturally from the verb form. But if we sit in the present and we look back at the past, then it all falls into place. It's a really subtle point, and I think that it is quite difficult to get sometimes. And sometimes when I tell my students about this, they're like, maybe. But then they start using present perfect right. Because if they try to use past simple about something, they're like, can I say it in the past simple? I'm like, well, is it true in the past? They go, yeah, go ahead, use the past simple then. That's fine. But when they're trying to use present perfect about a past time, I say, are you speaking from the present thinking about the past, or are you in the past? And they go, oh, I'm in the past. I said yesterday, so I'm in the past. Right. Can you use present perfect then if you're in the past? No. Falls into place. And it's another example of one of those kind of false dichotomies. When we're in the present, we can either think about the past or not think about the past. So that means we've got present perfect as an option and past simple. But when we're in the past, we don't have both choices available. We can only make one choice then. And that would be kind of the counterbalance to it. Okay. So we're coming to the end of our time together. There are other areas of grammar that I think are ripe for further exploration. For example, reasons for shifting back a tense. You'll notice that in English, there is a divorce between the choice of tense and the time we're talking about. So for example, if I say, if I were you, were is grammatically the past, but we're talking about a present time. So there's got to be a reason for that. And that leads us then into a discussion of the conditionals and what I think is the pointlessness of numbering them. Saying to students 0, first, second, third, mixed of first and second, mixed of second and third, I don't think it helps. I think there's a better way. Maybe you can figure it out. ing and ed endings, I think there's a lot of scope for exploration there. And more generally, lexical approaches to grammar. So getting away from this idea of grammar, like we saw, I am thinking there is a God, is not grammatically wrong. It just might be lexically wrong most of the time. And for this, I really recommend, if you're in the IH network, if you get your DOS to sign into the IH website, you'll find that there's the IH language awareness course, which some of you might have heard of, some of you might have done. It's written by Alex Tilbury about 10 years ago, and it's a goldmine of this kind of thing. And the very last thing that I'd like to share with you is a moment of shameless self-promotion. I mentioned at the start of the lesson that online teaching has been quite tricky. So I wrote about it. I've written a book called A Teacher's Journal of the Plague Year, and it's all about my adventures or misadventures teaching online, as well as being a personal account of the pandemic and being a teacher during the pandemic. It's also full of ideas that you can use in lessons, especially online lessons. As you can see from the cover, this looks very much like a Zoom window. Basically, I got my students to make it because a lot of my students were unwilling to turn on their cameras or microphones. So I said, hey, guys, could I just ask you to rename yourselves a little bit for a photo I want to take? And they did, which was quite nice. They didn't say anything when they did it, but they did it anyway, which was nice. So if you've been looking for a bit of solace, maybe to make you feel a bit better about your online teaching experiences, of course, I recommend this book. My mum also recommends it. And it's the first time I've written a book, because I've written several. It's the first time my mum's actually made it to the end of one. So if you're looking for a positive review, my mum says it's good. It's available on the Kindle and also on paperback. And I shall stop talking about my own stuff there. And I'll thank you all for being such wonderful participants. Some of the ideas that you put forward were fantastic. They were really well thought through. And I have to say, you are a credit to your students. I'm glad to know that there are people like you out there teaching. I shall hand back over to Theo. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you too, Chris. That was lovely. And just wanted to tell everyone that if you'd like to hear more of what Chris has to say, remember that he's also joining us for our conference in April. And you can sign up for it as we speak on our website. I also wanted to let you know that we have 2 more Coffee at IH webinars coming up this spring. The next one is on the 18th of March, with Lucy Cottrell, and then on the 25th of May with Jennifer Hillhouse. And you can also sign up for them on our website. And for this, for today's workshop, you will receive certificates of attendance as well as the link to the recording within a week. So by next Friday, you should have them in your inbox. Okay, and I think that's about everything I wanted to tell you. Thank you once again for being here, and thank you, Chris, for being here with us, and have a lovely weekend, everyone. See you.